Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this episode we're welcoming back in our friend Andy from the History of Africa podcast. I believe this is his third visit to the garden. Previous episodes have involved the Berbers, and there was an episode sort of on sort of tales from around Africa, not even really tales, went over linguistics and population groups and some myths and legends and things like that. So you may want to check out those shows, and you should certainly check out his show. Again, it's called the History of Africa podcast. I believe he's in season 3 or season 4 now. And obviously no one can sell a show better than he can, but I'll tell you that he takes a region or a place, and that's mostly what the season is devoted to. There was a season on the Hamites. There was a season on a Western African empire, where now into Madagascar. So I keep wanting to say Mozambique, which is a different thing entirely. So anyway, without further ado, Andy, how are you? Thanks for being on again.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing well. Yes, getting into Madagascar. Mozambique is a different place, though the two are actually quite close together. Mozambique is the closest part of mainland Africa to Madagascar, so I guess you weren't too far off geographically.
Yeah,
with that sort of inclination.
But one's an island and the other's part of the mainland. But yeah, no, but thank you for the save there, or the mitigation. So today, I sort of do this thing with Andy where I try not to copy too much from his shows, although the first episode he did with me was basically, sort of some hot topics from like the first 2 or 3 episodes he did that I found very interesting. I thought would be interesting there and to share. So, but Africa's a big continent with a rich, storied history, and there have been groups that, have these names and we don't know what they are. So that's why I said, who are the Berbers? So then this one, we're going to focus at least the first part of the show on who were the Moors, or who are the Moors. My introduction to the Moors was from the Charlton Heston movie El Cid, where he was a Spanish hero, a knight, a Christian fighting off the invading Moors. I then remember in 30 Rock that the Tracy Jordan character said that he knows that a buffoon is an insult. He's for a black pirate, and black Moors is just from the Moors. They were black, not Arabic or Semitic. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And then I'm like, well, I do know someone who knows a lot about Africa and how to research, and there's Andy. And then he posted something on Twitter, and I'm like, hey man, that's my jurisdiction, because he posted something about a legend in Madagascar where at some point the Madagascar in their origin myth or in their early civilization myth is that they were ruled by a race of dwarfish or gnome-like demonic overlords, and that's firmly my jurisdiction. And he said, now I think about it, that's something I should talk about on your show. I'm like, yeah. So that'll be the second half, and that's probably the most talking you're going to hear from me on the show. I know cheers everywhere. So Andy, just take it away. You're in charge.
So yes, that is. When you responded to me on Twitter about the Fasimba and that being the gnome-like people of Malagasy legend, it did seem like something more of what you discuss on the Garden of Doom, because at least from our first two encounters together on this show, it seems like an overarching trend is that you will bring up a topic and we'll have a really good discussion, then you'll close it with but were there aliens involved?
Yes.
I'll go
of course.
No. Yeah. And that's basically it. I'm surprised that one of your references to the Moors was not on Seinfeld, where they say the Moops.
Oh my God! Yeah, I definitely had that. And then different Moors from American Werewolf in London were saying "Beware the Moors," which is an entirely different concept altogether, I suppose. Though I think the word, I think it's the root, same as Morocco and Mauritania. I guess it means, Latin or something. It means black.
Well, there's a complicated etymology to it. So yes, Morocco and Mauritania are both linked to the Latin etymology of the term Moor, which is, I don't, my Latin kind of sucks. My Spanish is pretty good, but my Latin is horrible. And so I'm going to try to pronounce this like Mari. I'm not a classics guy, so sometimes people will, linguistic struggles are a constant of mine, but yes.
Me too.
Mari is sort of how I would try to pronounce the Latin there. I'm sure someone who took a lot more Latin than I ever took, which is 0, is snickering at me. But yeah, which is a term that the Romans used generally for people in North Africa. So Moor is a bit of a difficult term to define because it's what is called an exonym. And that it is a name that is not given by the people themselves, but is instead bestowed upon them to outsiders, right?
Interesting.
So a good example of this is trying to think of one. There's a ton of examples throughout history.
Native Americans.
Indian. Yeah, calling Native Americans Indians, right?
Or Native Americans. They didn't name the continent America.
Yeah, that is another example. Native American being a term that it's not of that origin, right? It was bestowed upon them by outsiders. So there's
Eskimo.
A few examples of that within specific Native American tribes. So I think Iroquois is a
French.
exonym.
Yeah. Eskimo.
Eskimo is also an exonym. Yes. And Moor is also an exonym, which is why it's a bit difficult to answer the question of who are the Moors. So the exact etymology of where the Romans got it from is also kind of complex and difficult. Moor is, how can I put this? It's a term that can basically mean very many things depending on context, depending on which language it's being said in, depending on the context of who says it, what it's being used for, and what it is prefaced by.
Right.
Which is why there's so much confusion about it, understandably. And to add to it, it's kind of an outdated term. I don't think it's considered an offensive term, not to my knowledge at least, but it's generally sort of antiquated because of how vague it is. So you don't really, whenever you hear the word Moor, you kind of hear it in a sort of medieval tone, right? People usually associate the term Moor, besides Seinfeld jokes, with Shakespeare, particularly Othello, and to a lesser extent The Merchant of Venice feature Moorishness as a major plot element, especially Othello.
Right.
And
I think also retroactively people have called Hannibal and Carthage Moors, but they were called Carthaginians, or
Yeah, that is not a term that they would have used for themselves. So the exact etymology of the Latin term is debated. There is some there's a pretty compelling notion that it means someone with a darker complexion. Though what exactly that means is an interesting question itself. Like, dark compared to who? Darker compared to the Romans? Well, if a Roman person looks at someone and calls them darker complexion, does that mean that they would be considered a darker complexion to us? Does it dark compared to Swedes? Dark compared to North Africans? Dark compared to who?
Right. If it's compared to me, that would be everybody.
Exactly, right? So given that Rome has Roman origin, or that the term has Roman origin, we would assume that they are probably referring to these people as being darker than themselves. And I think it's a bit strange that people will sometimes take that to mean that all Moors were necessarily black in the modern sense of the term, because that's another thing that needs to be brought up, is that the idea of being black is also an exonym. It is also a term that comes from outside. African cultures prior to contact and the development of relationships with outsiders did not think of themselves as being black, right? Because that's not...
Excuse me.
If you grow up surrounded by people with the exact same skin tone that you do, you don't think of yourself as being black or white or whatever. You just think of yourself as being skin colored, right?
Sure. Like, what do you call Chinese food in China? Food.
Exactly.
Right.
So this, it brings up an interesting thing involving skin tone itself, which is that due to the legacy of colonialism and racialism, which racialism, if you're not aware, is not the exact same thing as racism, but they often overlap, where racialism is just the belief that there are different biologically inclined human races, right? So a racialist would say that there are black people and there are white people, and they are different races of human, that they are biologically distinct, right? And that was a very, very dominant mode of thought in early modern and modern Europe. Was the idea that there were different races of humans. People would engage in all sorts of pseudoscientific experiments and, measuring skulls and the like, and to try to prove the idea of multiple human races. In fact, some went so far to claim that blacks, whites, Asians, all sorts, American Indians, that they all had a separate origin. This was a very common theory called plural genesis. Which was the idea that human beings originated, or were either, depending on who would argue, that they either were created or evolved separately. So I don't know why I said plural genesis, polygenicists would say that this was a very common idea, by the way, that I cannot emphasize. This was at one point considered a mainstream thought in European academia, that black people evolved from gorillas and white people evolved from chimpanzees and Asian people evolved from orangutans.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is what racialism is. And racialism still has a huge impact in how we talk today because it was so dominant. And it has such a big impact that it can feel like it's something that's always been present in human history, right? This idea that there are different races of humans, with the primary, not the only, but the primary differentiating factor being skin tone, right?
And then which alien interbred with our women, right?
Something along those lines.
Okay. I had to get it in.
Some more modern racialist revivalists will try to say that it has to do with which hominids your ancestors interbred with, but that's another can of worms of weird pseudoscience. But regardless, there's that is an idea which still permeates society, right? Just the way that we've had this conversation so far, where we talk in terms of black people and white people and Asian people, right? That idea still permeates the way that people discuss humanity in their everyday life, right?
Mm-hmm.
like if someone comes up to you on the street and asks, what race are you? You're probably not going to be like, well, race is a modern construct of the colonial period, so that's kind of a difficult... No, you're probably just going to say white, black, Asian. In the U.S. as well, sort of a good example of how this thing is social constructed. Hispanic is often considered a race, which is strange because it is not viewed that way really anywhere else in the world. In Latin America, there are people who would be called white, who call themselves Hispanic. There are people who would be called black, who would be called Asian, who would be called Native American, who identify with the term Hispanic because it's more of a cultural label and a linguistic label.
Yes.
But that's a good example of how race is a sort of socially constructed thing, where this idea of a Hispanic race in the U.S. comes in. And it's the same thing with when we study the past, is that because of the influence of racialism, people will often project modern racialist ideas into the past. Maybe the best known example of this is the debate about ancient Egyptian race. Right, where people will try to say, because we, like modern people, have grown up in a world where racialism is still a prevalent ideology, even if not many people still advocate for it directly, but it still influences our thought, where people will try to say that this group belonged to this race. They will try to say Egyptians belong to the black race, or they belong to the white race, or they belong to a separate Middle Eastern race, which some people would argue is not even in existence, and that Middle Easterners are actually white people, or Middle Easterners are actually black people, or actually Asians. And I want to clarify that this is all fake. It's all arbitrary classification. And when you get into the genetics of it, that's where that really is proven. And that I think I've talked about this on the podcast. I don't know if I've talked about it with you. That there's more genetic diversity within not only Africa than the rest of the world, but within like East Africa than the rest of the world. That there's more genetic diversity within East Africa than the rest of the world combined.
Right.
So you can take someone from the Congo, and there's a pretty good chance that they would have more in common genetically with someone from Scotland and someone from Japan than they might with someone from southern Ethiopia. Right? It's totally possible that someone from one side of Ethiopia could have more in common genetically with someone from Greenland and someone from Thailand than with someone from another part of Ethiopia. Right? So this idea that we can group people into these easily understood, objective biological races is total fallacy.
Yeah.
And I say that because people will try to do that with the term Moor.
Okay.
They'll try to say Moors are black, Moors are white, Moors are Middle Eastern. And when you're examining humanity in a cultural context and a historical context, you can't necessarily approach it from a lens which views our modern racialist perspective as being objective, right?
Right. And usually when there's an army, it's usually comprised of people of lots of different tones, hues, nationalities. They weren't exactly nation states then, but maybe they were. I'm not sure. But, Rome had legions, made up of folks from, all of the different territories. So,
yes. Egypt is a good example of that. When you look at depictions of people who are Egyptian, even within the same era, you can see people with darker skin, lighter skin in the middle. And even within Egypt today, you can see that Egyptian people come in many different hues. If you Google what people from Aswan look like versus what people from Alexandria look like, typically, there are people with all sorts of skin tones. So trying to say that this group is like that, it's a bit like if someone asked you, hey, what color is an American? Right?
Yeah, right. Red, white, and blue.
Yeah, red, white, and blue, and the color of Budweiser, right? So that's...
The taste of Budweiser.
That's the answer there. And in the case of the Moors, it's even further complicated because Moor is not a real designation. There was no group of people walking around going, yeah, we're Moors, right? That's who I am. I'm a Moor. It was only a term which existed in the context of people pointing at somebody else and saying, that person is a Moor.
Gotcha. Sort of like the Saracens, right?
Yes, Saracen is another really good example of an exonym. Chinese as well is a term which is an exonym, though that one has kind of been adopted in a sense, to my knowledge. I don't know. A friend, I had a long conversation with a friend of mine from China about this a couple of years ago. But that's the interesting thing about it, is that the way that the fact that it's an exonym has us view the Moors, because whenever you see the term Moor written in a book or manuscript, you can guarantee that that's not written by someone who is called a Moor, right?
Right.
And so that's part of why it's so hard to determine who the Moors actually are, is because it's a term that only exists from an outsider's perspective.
Yet we shall try.
Yep. So let's look at these outsider perspectives then. So Moor, as it entered into the English language, did not enter directly from Latin. Instead, it entered through a combination of diffusion from the Spanish word moro and a French rendition of Moor that I can't pronounce because it's French, so I'm not even going to bother.
Okay.
But Moro is an interesting term because that is where the concept of Moor largely entered the mindset of medieval Christians, right? And I say Christians instead of Europeans because the idea of Europe existing as a distinct continent wasn't really well known at the time. What was a better, more popular idea was to think of the world as being divided into Christendom and the land of the Saracens, as the Christians would have seen it, or the Dar al-Islam, and then the land of the Franks, as the Muslims would have seen it. So, either way you look at it, you sort of have to look at this from outside of the modern racial paradigm.
Right.
And when you try to do that, you realize that Moor is a term which makes very little sense in that context, but actually makes a lot of sense when you look at it through the paradigm of the religious paradigm that dominated Christendom at the time, that viewed people primarily and judged people primarily not based off of their skin tone, but off of their religious affiliation. So Moor is a term which was almost exclusively used to refer to Muslims.
Okay.
At least initially. You can see in later eras, so one of my sources that I read for this, just to refresh my memory, was Blackface Maligned Race, The Representation of Blacks in English Drama by Anthony Gerard Barthélemy. I'm not good with pronunciation. Barthélemy. I'm going to say Barthélemy. I'm sorry, Anthony, if you're listening to this. You did a really good job with this book. But yeah, it talks about how within Shakespeare, in the context of English language more generally, Moor gradually moved on from being a term to refer to Muslims and more just a term to refer to exotic peoples. Just anyone who was seen as foreign and unusual was a Moor. But to go back before that, the main context in which Moor enters the Christian idea is as a consequence of the conquest of Spain and Portugal by the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate, or Umayyad Khalifate. So the Umayyad Khalifate conquers Spain, and that idea of Moorishness thus enters the Christian mindset, of that the Moors are these people who came from Africa and took over Spain, right? And in artistic depictions of Moors, because remember, there are no depictions of Moors that are actually made by North Africans. They come from Christians, right? In depictions of Moors, they are physically depicted in any number of ways. You see Moors with skin that is black by today's standards, right? Of course, very few people actually literally have black skin, but like that's just a term that we use to describe anyone of African heritage these days. And the people displayed here are very clearly from sub-Saharan Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you also have Moors who are depicted as having white skin. And of course, similarly, very few people are actually truly like white. You know, they have a sort of pinkish tone, right?
Right.
And of course, you see plenty of people in between who have a sort of, you know, dusty rose and sienna type skin tone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who have a skin tone that is sort of a darker brown, but not as dark brown as the other Moors in the picture. You know, you have people whose skin tone is Almost a perfect emulation of DreamWorks' The Prince of Egypt and their characters, right? That sort of like coffee brown. You see all sorts of different colors, right?
Right. It's like that the Twitter thing where what does your cup of coffee look like?
Exactly. More in the sense is kind of a term like coffee in that it doesn't necessarily describe color.
Right.
So people will often try to claim that Moors are this or no, Moors are that when it comes to skin tone. It's become a common talking point among Afrocentrists to try to claim that Moors are black, because they use that modern racial parlance where they say Moors are black, right? As in to say they are dark-skinned people from sub-Saharan Africa. This idea is not entirely wrong. There certainly were people who were described as Moors by Europeans who would be considered black by today's standards. You also have people who counter and say, no, Moor is a term used to describe North Africans, so they should be lighter in skin tone. And similarly, they're not wrong. There were people described as Moors who had lighter skin tone. So this whole idea of trying to apply modern racial paradigms to the Moors is really difficult to do on multiple levels. And of course, that idea has become further integrated into the Western cultural lens because of Shakespeare. And so it's kind of impossible to discuss Moors without Shakespeare. And you can sort of see this disagreement over the color of Moorish people, even within renditions of Shakespeare. In the English world, Othello and renditions of Othello are typically depict him as being very dark-skinned, right? In the past, that was usually done by actors in blackface. These days, it's typically done by black actors.
Right.
And so that is an example of how so that is an example of how the British viewed Moors and how that idea of the Moors being darker-skinned people occurred there. In other European plays involving Moors, including other Shakespeare plays, the depiction is a bit more varied. In The Merchant of Venice, there is a strange depiction in the Shakespeare's stage direction, where Shakespeare occasionally gives stage directions, apparently. I don't know much about Shakespeare outside of his depiction of Moorish people, because that's the main stuff I've read about him, to be honest. English literature is not my strength. But that is what he demands for the stage direction, specifying the actor's costume, is he demands a, quote-unquote, a tawny Moor, all in white. And tawny is a bit of a term that doesn't really use much anymore, but it sort of means like a tan color, is how I describe it.
Like leather, khaki kind of color?
Yeah, so a khaki, that's a good way of putting it, right? And the interesting thing about it is that both Othello and The Merchant of Venice take a similar, use their Moorish characters similarly, in that both of them are ostracized for their Moorish origins, right? Othello, of course, is very heavily discriminated against because they don't believe that his conversion to Christianity is legitimate. Of course, the story also takes place in medieval Italy, so in a time where it was both written and takes place in a time where religion was the dominant way of viewing and judging and classifying others.
Right. Now we've managed to find so many ways to consider others.
Yes, and keep in mind that this is even more pertinent here because Moor itself is never a term directed towards yourself. It is always a term directed to someone else, right? That is, by its nature, that's what the term was designed for. It doesn't describe a specific people. And that is essentially how I would sum up the idea of what Moor means. Is that traditionally, Moro, as used in Spanish, as well as in Portuguese and later in some other languages around Europe, essentially means Muslim from Africa, typically.
Okay.
And that could be any kind of Muslim from Africa. That could be a Muslim from Africa with skin tone that was tawny or dark, like dark brown, like black by modern standards, or pale. That could be anything. In English, more not only refers to a Muslim from Africa, but a Muslim more generally. And even more generally than that, by the early modern period, more had taken a sense of just meaning sort of anything foreign, right? Anything foreign, anything other, anything exotic.
Right.
So attempts to understand and answer who are the Moors, or as is more often asked, what race are the Moors? Because that is a question that people are always kicking around, and that seems to be the main context in which questions about the Moors are asked, is kind of a fallacious one by its nature, I think, in that you are trying to ascribe a nonsensical colonial idea of biological race onto people who had not yet had that idea implanted in their minds.
Right. And I mean, I think from a scientific standpoint, there's only one race, so human. So it's not even. Yeah. But I understand what you're saying. Or
even then, if you have to divide humanity into biological races, there are 100 races, 99 of which are in East Africa, and then everyone else.
Yeah, I remember I think it was your first episode or one of them that said that there were 38 different distinct tribes, cultures, people, pygmies. You know, it wasn't one tribe. It was something like 3 dozen or whatever. It was,
no, and they're not even necessarily related to each other. There's genetic, and this could lead into Fasimba because there's a lot of there's a lot of debate as to whether or not the Fasimba represent a Malagasy expansion of a pygmy culture, but even the idea of a pygmy race or a pygmy people in general is generally viewed as an outdated concept because it's not uncommon for certain pygmy peoples, like the Twa in Rwanda, to be more closely related to other nearby non-pygmy peoples than to other pygmy peoples. So,
yeah. The world is not a simple place.
No, nothing is ever simple and easy to understand. Everything has to be complicated all the time.
That's right.
Sadly. Or, well, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say sadly, because that's part of the joy in life, right?
Right. That's. I mean, what would I do if I wasn't doing a podcast exploring things that I didn't know very much about? I mean, I'd just be eating more pizza.
Exactly.
Which is something I know a lot about.
I mean, and I do that anyways while figuring out other stuff.
Multitasker. Show off.
Yes.
All right, so are we going to try to describe who the Moors are, or are we going to leave it at it's foolish to even try to because you're taking you're trying to put a descriptor on a people that doesn't apply at all in any sort of objective way?
So I wouldn't say it's foolish to try to describe what the Moor is, but I would say that it is foolish to try to assume that there is a Moorish people.
Okay.
The way that I would define a Moor is a European. Okay, let me think of a good way to phrase this. That a Moor is the European understanding of Muslims from Africa. Is how I'd phrase it. And of course, there's the further nuances that it was used more generally as an exotic term to mean anyone who is foreign and interesting and other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you could adequately, like if you had to do a dictionary definition, Moor would be like a term used by Europeans to describe Muslims from Africa.
When was the Iberian invasion from North Africa?
Well, there's a few of them, actually, but the main one was in the 7th century AD, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay, so this was really just on the heels of sort of the Arabic, if it's even really Arab entirely, but let's just call the Arab invasion of North Africa, and I guess they just kept continuing along with their new assimilated army members or citizens. I don't really know how it was set up. I know it was a caliphate, the converts, whatever. But I guess they just kept going. They came over from the Sinai and they in North Africa, not overnight, but I think it was pretty much done by the 600s. And I guess from there they turned their attention north and said, "Oh, well, that's the shortest point, so let's go here."
Yeah, there's a bit of a discrepancy between the two because the conquest of North Africa occurred under the direction of Khalif Umar, who was or I can never pronounce that correctly because it uses an Arabic sound which is not present in English. Almar, the Khalif Almar, who was the third Khalif of the Rashidun, or rightly guided caliphate, or Khalifat. But yes, whereas the conquest of Iberia occurred under the Umayyad Caliphate after a whole list of complex events involving the reign of Khalif Ali and the purported origins of Islamic sectarian conflict during the second fitna and first fitna. And there's too much to get into.
Right. So even what I said is way too simplistic.
Well, I think it's a decent summation. I would say that the military campaigns of not only the conquest of Iberia but rather that the conquest of North Africa was not exactly one big sweeping military campaign. But I think that if you want to view it through the lens of momentum, that you could view it that way, right? Where it's that the Caliphate was able to, essentially, for many different reasons, had the military momentum that was unmatched at the time to sweep in through North Africa and then continue upwards. I think that's fair enough.
Okay, very good. So the composition of those forces were probably, what you would consider traditionally, Levantine, Persian, Turkic, Arab, Semitic, Horn of Africa. I'm sure there were plenty of sub-Saharan Africans involved as well. So it's probably very much a multi-ethnic. I'll use the word ethnic, not racial. I'm not even sure if that's exactly right, but group.
Certainly, and there's actually some pretty good records of some tensions within the Khalifate's army, with Amazigh, or Berber forces, not always being willing to take orders from Arab commanders, as well as some outright mutinies.
Sorry.
Even beyond that, there is the issue that Moor is a term that doesn't describe a particular time or place, that you also have to take into account all the different demographic changes that occurred throughout North Africa in the medieval period. So, despite the fact that people like to arbitrarily divide Africa down a Saharan line, many people from sub-Saharan Africa, as it's typically called, moved into the Maghreb. Many Maghrebis moved into the Sahel, or south of the Sahara.
Yeah, people move. People migrate.
Yes.
People migrate, and sometimes they even go back.
Yes. There were many Europeans who converted to Islam and ended up moving to North Africa. There were people from Europe and North Africa who were enslaved by the others. There were people from the Sahel who were enslaved. There's all these different reasons for why people would move. There's records of people from, this is during a slightly later period, but during the early modern period, there are records of people from the Sahel going and speaking in Islamic community centers and madras and universities, and vice versa. People from north of the Sahara moving down and speaking and teaching at universities south of the Sahara. So even beyond just these demographic movements, there's a lot of sort of nuances in who is in Who is Who, there's one of the major leaders of a rebellion against a later state which claimed to be a caliphate called the Fatimid Caliphate, was himself the product of a marriage between a North African Amazigh man and a woman from somewhere south of the Sahara. We don't know exactly where, because the chronicles just list her as being from some dark-skinned people south of the Sahara. And then, of course, I didn't even mention this, but you also have to take into account that the people who are being described in question here, that is, medieval Christians and medieval Muslims, did have their own conception of race that varied dramatically from how we view it today, where they viewed human beings as being the product of various tribes descended from Noah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they viewed, and this didn't always align with skin tone, so both, all people in Africa, so both light-skinned North Africans and dark-skinned Sub-Saharan Africans, and anyone in between, was viewed as being a Hamite, right? People descended from the son of Ham, and that was used to justify a lot of subjugation, exploitation, and other discrimination by people from areas external to Africa. They would say, like, oh, well, of course we need to, have an Arab dynasty ruling over this area in North Africa, because the Amazigh, they are Hamites, they are cursed, they are just destined for subjugation.
Now what was the curse of Ham? Why was he considered the dark sheep, so to speak?
That's getting into a whole theological thing that I don't want to get into. The association between Africa and Ham to begin with is fallacious, because it's based on a pretty erroneous folk etymology, where people thought that Ham's name, when translated into certain Greek, sounded like Cush, and so they assumed it's weird. There's nothing actually in the Bible to claim that dark-skinned people are all descended from Ham, or that Africans are all descended from Ham.
Okay.
It was a weird thing that it was a weird folk etymology that coincidentally could be used to justify some pretty atrocious stuff, so it was.
Gotcha. I'm afraid to ask this now, but what is Cush?
Cush being an antiquated term for modern-day Sudan.
Oh, okay.
And it was kind of just used sometimes to refer to any sort of dark-skinned people.
Right, or, not the noble Egyptians, or, but below the noble Egyptians were the Cushites, or whatever they call them. Okay. I good enough for government work. I have it. I did a show way back when with a black Israelite, and, I asked him some questions, and his response was basically, oh, no, those are Hamites. We don't deal with Hamites. And I don't know. Everything I thought that what I knew about black Israelites was wrong.
They have a very confusing and strange theology.
Yes, and but it's sort of specific, but it's I don't know. I would tell people to listen to the show. Just a warning: the audio is terrible. I even had an outside producer work on that one just by coincidence, but. The gentleman, it sounded like he was on an old phone in a submarine, and we couldn't remix it, but it's still an interesting show to check it out. It's like you said, it's a very interesting dogma. I don't want to say unique, because I truly have no idea. There's tons of dogmas out there. Anyway,
it is pretty unique, I'd say.
Yeah.
Anyway, I say this not as an endorsement. There's really nothing else like it.
Yeah, one day when I wrap up this show and I've talked to every single denomination and sect and cult and group in the world, I'll be able to opine on that. But so far, it's the most unique that I have spoken to. But
they used to harass me and my friends in undergrad to try to get us to talk to them. They do that at colleges a lot. That's their main. That's a whole different side note, though. Yeah, their theology is that black people are, in America, African Americans, and not just in the United States, but in the Americas more generally, people descended from slaves. are the true Israelites, and that people in Africa today are the evil Hamites who sold them.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, that included what we'd roughly call Latin Americans, that they were also Black Israelites. Though I don't know a single person from Central America or South America who would who I've ever met that said the same. Anyway,
there's all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting and strange ideology, but basically no one in Africa is Black, according to the Black Israelites. So that's a very simple way of
they're Black, but Black is only a color. So according to the Black Israelites,
I
guess that's the term that they always used to tell me, is that Black is only a color. We are Israelites, and the Africans are all Hamites, as they see it.
I know that Cain had the mark and he was cursed. I just don't know what Ham did. But all right, you said you want to get into it.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah, well,
I can't be bothered. I'm sorry. I can't. We have other stuff to get into, so I don't want to go on another long rant about.
It's all right.
Theology.
I have plenty of people to talk about theology and interesting little nuggets and things that took lives of their own in theology. So that's cool. All right. So I can't remember exactly where we left off in ours, other than we sort of came up with a definition that was good enough, even though technically inaccurate for Moors. I don't know if that ends the portion on Moors, or if you had more to impart to us.
No, I'd say that just about covers it. I'd say that if people want to learn more about the people who they've called Moors, they should look into the Islamic cultures of North and West Africa. There's tons of them to look into. You could start with Konum, or you could get into Mali, or you could get into all sorts of the ones in the north, like the Almohads and the Almoravids, and there's so much to get into. I don't even know where to tell people to start, but just do it. If you want to learn more about that, do it. It's fascinating.
Well, for a guy who says that you're not good with pronunciation, you just rattled off some pretty hard words to pronounce. So. Maybe so.
I'm decent with some pronunciation.
Okay.
Arabic, I generally do okay, but not perfect. Spanish, I do pretty well.
Okay.
Just because I've spoken Spanish for a long time. So.
Well, let's get into gnomish, possibly evil overlords, because that's awesome.
Oh, speaking in unpronounceability, yep, Madagascar. Oh my God. I love Madagascar, but well, I shouldn't say but. Part of the reason why I love Madagascar is because the names are so intricate. Typically 15 letters plus.
Oh.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because, Madagascar is a gigantic island, but I wonder if when you're on an island in sort of a trapped ecosystem, that the way that you continue to distinguish different clans as families turn into clans, and clans turn into tribes, and tribes turn into towns, and towns turn into cities, and cities turn into states, that you just add extra syllables onto it to differentiate, and maybe that's part of it.
Well, mostly when it comes to the long names, it's mostly present among Highlander peoples, so the Betsileo and Imerina, or just Merina. Imerina is where they live, but the Merina people are known for having very lengthy names. And I think it's really cool because it's usually, at least what I've found, it's that they stand, they mean something very intricate and very specific. So, one of the names that I had a hard time pronouncing was Andrea Mananitani, which is a fun name to say.
Yep.
And it means something, oh God. Let me pull it up. I think I wrote in a podcast script what it actually means. It is long.
Child of the dolphin, sun, and sky mother, and the snake around the world.
That sort of deal, yeah. Well, I don't have that one, but I do have the name of a town which is Ambohitran Andreanahari, which means the village of keen submission to the king.
Ooh.
I believe, is an okay, if serviceable.
Yeah, it's a little redundant. King's submission to the king, but okay. Is that?
Well, there's a whole story behind that, where the village submitting to the king. There's a whole story behind how. I apologize. That one I got them mixed up. That is not the village of submission to the king. That is the village of where God lives. That is the village where God lives, basically.
I hope it's a nice village.
The story is that Andrea Manlitani built 2 towns, and his brother got upset that he built one with a large wall because he thought that meant that there might be issues, and so he asked him to get rid of that one, the city where God lives, and build a new one called Village of Submission to the King.
Ah, okay. Well, I don't know if God lived there or not, and I don't know if that king made a smart decision or not. I mean, walls, I think, were useful in certain times in certain cultures, but they might be especially useful for keeping out half-size, demonic, evil overlord dwarves with bad intentions.
So, getting into what you're discussing there, Malagasy mythology features a people called the Fasimba, who are maybe one of the most interesting topics I've covered on the show, personally. I liked covering them a lot. Because it's much like Moor, there's a lot of ambiguity in that it is almost certainly an exonym, for one thing, and also that it is a term with all sorts of connotations that may or may not be fair, and that has varied a lot over time. Historically, among Malagasy Christians, the idea of Fasimba has been viewed somewhat negatively. That's where most of the stories of Fasimba being dwarven, demonic, ugly creatures comes from, right? Mm-hmm. Is that Malagasy Christians would depict them quite negatively. And most likely, the most likely reproduction or sort of reconstruction of the timeline regarding Fasimba mythology goes that, okay, so prior to the arrival of the ancestors of the Merina people, there were likely a group of people living in the highlands of Madagascar, right? Then those people interbred with the Merina, because that is a common thread in all of these stories. And eventually the Merina, to some extent, kicked them out or killed them, depending on which version you believe. And those people are called the Fasimba, and are also simultaneously venerated for being very wise and powerful and having great magical powers. But that brings into some of the contradictory elements of that, which is that these people who are viewed in the traditional Malagasy religion as being very wise and powerful, people often pray at sites associated with Fasimba, especially in assistance in things like childbirth or starting a new business, are also portrayed quite negatively. So in the mythology, they are typically perceived as being uncivilized, that they have not figured out farming or metallurgy. They are described as using clay tools instead of metal ones, and that they don't know how to butcher and consume cattle, and instead they live off of the milk of feral cattle. And that they, that they're not doing anything right, basically. That they're not civilized. They're primitive people.
Right.
And they make a really big deal out of emphasizing this in the book that I'm referencing, the Tantana ni Andriana Antananarivo, is that the people, the Fasimba, they don't honor their dead ancestors, which is
yeah.
That's a really big deal in Malagasy culture, is that you must properly honor and engage in the proper burial rites for your deceased ancestors. And the fact that the Fasimba were not doing that is a clear implication of their lack of character, right?
Yes. Understood. I'm with you so far.
Yeah, and the idea here is that these negative depictions of Fasimba, because they are also portrayed, should add this, as incredibly ugly.
Good.
They are short, and again, this isn't something that most people hopefully don't view it as ugly today, but by Merina beauty standards, were very colorist, and they saw dark skin as being ugly. So the Fasimba are jet black, short. They have glowing red eyes, gigantic teeth, enormous mouths, and droopy ears, and they're kind of like little. There's some depictions of them that are still around in statuettes, and they look almost imp-like. That those depictions are weird because there's random exceptions to it in Malagasy mythology. There's seemingly arbitrary exceptions where there will be Fazimba women who are described as being incredibly beautiful.
Okay.
Specifically, the sexy Fazimba are almost exclusively the ancestors of later Merina rulers. So there's a pretty obvious reason for that.
Yes,
no one wants to be like, oh, my mom's a Fazimba. Yeah, she was an ugly little dwarf creature, right? Like,
right.
It's no, like my great grandmother was a Fazimba, but she was one of the hot ones.
Right. Got it. Yeah. From the noble line.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is that a lot of people in Imerina today do claim to have Fazimba heritage, and that it's more common to claim Fazimba heritage if you are of noble descent. That it's strange, right? Because you would think that, given how negatively they are portrayed in Malagasy legend, that there would, be a reluctance to claim descent, but from the people at the top, and that they would describe it to the people at the bottom. But no, that's because Malagasy hierarchy actually places a very big emphasis on land ownership, particularly ancestral land ownership, where basically the longer you can establish that your family has been on the land that you are working or having other people work, the more social privilege is awarded correspondingly.
Well, that's hardly unique.
Yeah, whereas, some people to this day are very proud of the fact that, oh, my granddaddy's granddaddy worked on this same farm as I do. It's like that, but, socially applied, right? So it would denote you greater social privileges as well, and social respect and prestige.
The landed gentry, the British royal family, or for those of you who watch Yellowstone, the Dutton Yellowstone Ranch.
Yeah, though it would be a little bit different in the case of the British, because I don't know too much about British history, but haven't the British monarchs, mostly been composed of foreigners?
I mean...
Because, the current monarchs are German, right?
Well, yes and no. The Angles and the Saxons were both Germanic tribes.
No, I don't mean isn't I believe the House Windsor is directly descended from German immigrants in the 1700s, right?
Yeah, Habsburgs. George III didn't even speak English; he spoke German.
Yeah, and then there was William and Mary were Dutch. I want to say.
At least one of them
English history is not my forte. I know that there were French people who conquered England.
Oh, for sure. The Normans, and this is common everywhere. But back to the Fasimbi. How some of them.
It's a little bit different with Madagascar, because whereas in Britain it's more about can you establish a direct ancestral line to this particular place, it's more about, it would be the equivalent of if someone took great pride of, my ancestors are uninterrupted Celts who have worked this land since before Roman times, right? The longer back you can go, the better.
Gotcha. Yeah, it grows with each generation, your social status.
And of course, the biggest social status you can get then is by claiming Fazimba heritage.
Right, because it's a semi-divine, and since you're not hideous and ugly with flaming red eyes and droopy ears, and you're not, half the size of another person, you obviously came from the rare, beautiful Fazimbas.
Yeah. So, in analyzing this, there was the work of one particular academic that influenced me a lot, and has really influenced Malagasy studies a lot, because his work has just been really tremendous in regard to Fazimba, and more generally analyzing the way that later European and Christian narratives have strongly influenced the way that not only Fazimba but other elements of Malagasy history are viewed. So I'm trying to remember his first name, but his last name is Bird. I'm forgetting his first name, but
Admiral. Big. That's about the end of the birds I know. Gerald, okay.
Actually not too far from Admiral in terms of sound. Gerald, yeah, I just pulled up one of his JSTOR links. Gerald Berg wrote a lot about the Fasimba question, as it was called in Malagasy history, where it's the question of, like, who actually are these people who are so important to Malagasy history. And in the case of Gerald Berg, I think he made a pretty compelling point that the modern negative portrayals of Fasimba are mostly associated with an attempt by Christian missionaries to undermine more traditional ancestral cults, where that people venerated and respected Fasimba, who were not necessarily viewed as demonic or short or impish, but were just rather viewed as normal ancestral people, and that they later added these elements to say, no, you shouldn't worship these people. These Fasimba are demonic. They were ugly. Don't worship them, right?
So they turned the angels into demons.
I guess you could say that. No, not even angels, just like people.
People. Okay, so these are not supernatural beings necessarily. They're not of the earth or from the sky. No aliens involved or no gods intermingling with man. This was just I guess the old one, so to speak, who lived on the island earliest, or at least had were in power at some point in the long lost past.
Yes, that's Berg's theory, and one that I think is pretty compelling, is that these stories are simply modifications of an older tradition of ancestral worship that we do know existed and still exists within Madagascar. And I think he makes a pretty compelling case. But that does open up more interesting questions, such as, okay, if the Fasimba were just normal people, who were they?
Yeah,
right?
And where are they now?
Yeah, and there is a bit of debate on both of those questions, because it varies a lot depending on retellings of oral traditions and on analysis as well as archaeological evidence. For a long time, European scholars assumed that the Fasimba were Africans, particularly Africans of what they called the pygmy race.
Mm-hmm.
There's some reason to doubt that, because the idea, like we mentioned earlier, the idea of a pygmy race is kind of defunct, in that the various peoples who have short stature throughout Africa are not necessarily related to each other.
Right.
And that it is most likely an environmental adaptation that came out relatively recently among various different people multiple times. There's also the fact that there's very little linguistic evidence for any sort of non-Austronesian presence, because most Malagasy people are just descended from a mixture of Bantu peoples from mainland Africa and Austronesian peoples from Indonesia. And so there's very little evidence of any sort of non-Austronesian presence in Highland Madagascar prior to the 15th century. And we know that because the place names are almost exclusively Austronesian, and place names are usually a very good indicator of, well, just about anything. So, in the context of the United States, even though the indigenous inhabitants were subjugated and forcefully assimilated or exterminated in some cases by the more dominant Anglo-American culture, you still have a lot of place names of native origin.
Sure.
Right? Same with Mexico, right? Or even in Britain, in England, there's plenty of Celtic place names, even though, culturally the Celts are conquered, right?
Yep.
There's plenty of Siberian place names in Eastern Russia. There's, plenty of place names deriving from Amazigh in North Africa, even in places that have since been subjugated by the more dominant Arab culture.
Oh, I just thought of a great exonym, Aztec.
Well, Aztec is a bit... I would have to ask my friend who is a scholar of Mesoamerica, but I believe Aztec is an endonym, more generally to refer to a group of 5 different peoples who came together in an alliance. It's just not necessarily an ethnic term. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask him about it, though.
Okay, well, maybe it's not such a great one, but all right.
So I that's not really my area, but I believe I remember him him saying something about how people sometimes try to say Aztec is an illegitimate term, and he says it's not. And
well, this is not my expertise, but my understanding is that it was pronounced something like Mezchica or Mezchiza, which is where Mexico comes from.
Mexica, that was one of the groups within the alliance.
Okay, so
the
it's
largest, most dominant one, but only one of the groups within the alliance.
Okie doke. All right, it's interesting you said some came from Indonesia because, listen, I have no idea what the timelines here, because I'm not an anthropologist, and even though I read those articles and whatever, I instantly forget about as 20 times more than I retain. But in the South Pacific, in the Philippines, and I think in Malaysia, I'm not sure about the Indonesia, but it stands to be likely that there are two distinct Homo sapiens, which they're calling Hobbit people there, but there were two different kinds. Like I think one is called Homo florensis, and then there's another Homo something else, and it's not that far. I mean, of course, there was no Indonesia then. It was, whatever they called it. The world looked different and whatever. But I wonder if maybe there's something to that. I mean, I recognize that is no more scientific than saying, probably just pygmies. Just because there were short people one place. But I'm not a scientist, so that's what I do.
Well, Indonesian paleontology is not my thing, but if I'm not mistaken, didn't those people go extinct a really, really long time ago?
I'm really not sure. I mean, you could be 100% right.
Yeah. I mean, drawing a connection between Fasimba and a long gone hominid seems difficult to substantiate.
All right. So back to aliens,
plus
right?
The people Homo florensis, were, I believe, from the archipelago, which includes the island of Flores, which is in southern Indonesia, whereas the anthropological and more generally archaeological and linguistic evidence seems to support that Malagasy originated in Borneo, which is that kind of thick circular-ish island.
Yep.
It's the largest Indonesian island. Particularly that they were Dayak, which is the pre-Malay people from that island.
Oh, of course, I forgot that.
Well, it's just an interesting.
No, I'm glad that you know all this stuff. I mean, you do the history of Africa. I didn't know that if I spit out something like that you'd actually know where the island of Flores was, and Malay and all of this stuff. It's great. It's.
Well, I try to have my focus is in Africa, but I try to have a decently comprehensive view of most places.
Excellent. Great.
I mean, I don't know anywhere near the same detail. I can't tell you anything about. I don't think I know the name of a single monarch from Indonesia, for example. Okay. In history.
King Indo.
I just don't. I can't think I do. I think I played Civ 5 when I was a kid.
Right.
And so I'd probably if you pressed me, I'd probably be able to remember the name of the monarch from Civ 5, but that's it.
Yeah,
I don't really know that much about Indonesia. I do know a lot about Madagascar, though. So
I think his name was Joe. But anyway, so back to Madagascar.
Yeah.
I forget about my wacky theory. So what does the archaeology, anthropology lead us to believe are the possibilities of these folks, these short people who got a bad rap probably by Jesuits and other Christian missionaries?
So there's two theories that I personally think are very strong. There's one that I think is a bit less strong. The one I think is a bit less strong is that the people who would later be known as Fasimba were the descendants of a group of settlers from mainland Africa, particularly pre-Bantu peoples. Most likely either Khoisan-speaking peoples, people who spoke a language in the Khoisan family, or people who spoke languages in the Afro-Asiatic family. I don't think there's much to support that because there's no place names. There's very little linguistic evidence for that. That's the big thing, is the lack of place names.
Okay.
Because, like I said, with Native Americans, for example, there's always place names. Whenever one group gets conquered and assimilated by another, not many things get left behind, but place names almost certainly do.
Gotcha.
Place names are unusually resilient. in terms of cultural change.
Right.
That said, one theory that I don't personally think it's the strongest, but I do take it seriously, is that the Fasimba might be the remnants of a hunter-gatherer culture that we know existed on Madagascar at one point prior to Austronesian migration. So this group, we don't know much about them, but there is some fossil or subfossil evidence and some archaeological evidence to show that human beings likely did live on Madagascar for a time between 500 BC and 300 AD. Though the evidence for these people, though it's present, is quite rare, which is generally an indication that they were most likely either not very numerous or were transient, as in that they may have not even lived on the island all the time, that they might have gone back and forth between the mainland, or they moved around various parts of the island nomadically. And so this population, to the extent that it existed on Madagascar, could have established itself, and that the Fasimba were the remnants of this culture who were still there when the Austronesians showed up, which is possible, I suppose. I do think that the theory is compelling because A, we don't really know anything about the culture that was there before, except that they were probably hunter-gatherers, which is what the Fasimba were supposed to be, according to Malagasy legend, but I'll get into that in a little bit too, because that might not be true. But that means that if this is true, and the Fasimba were their ancestors, then we wouldn't really know what archaeological or linguistic evidence, we know archaeological, but we wouldn't know what linguistic evidence to look for in place names.
Right.
So, yeah, that remains a promising idea, right? Is that, sure, there was another group of people there who we don't know about, and so we don't know what to look for.
Right. There's also theory number 3, which is that they were monsters, and there's theory number 4 that they were aliens.
Yeah, and then, so after those two equally plausible theories,
right,
we come to theory number 5, which is the one that I personally find to be the most valid, which is that they were likely just waves from an earlier Austronesian migration. The place names being exclusively Austronesian seems to support that. The lack of any otherwise unexplainable linguistic stratum existing in Malagasy today explains that. There's also a lot of archaeological evidence that shows that the portrayal of Fasimba as hunter-gatherers is almost certainly not true. There's a lot of archaeological evidence for early rice farming at a time when the Fasimba were supposed to be not farming rice, and they're supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. There's some pretty good evidence of larger semi-urban settlements too, which seems unlikely for these people who are depicted in the legends as being simple and primitive, right? There's also, perhaps most crucially, there's evidence for iron metallurgy. So this idea that they were all using clay tools and that they had never discovered how to do metallurgy is almost certainly not true. So that is the interesting thing there. And the Austronesian theory doesn't necessarily explain those latter things, but it does show that, we don't necessarily need to take the legends at their word, that we can and should view them kind of critically.
Well, they othered them by calling them savages, basically, and they didn't know anything. So even though, how old were? I'm much older than you, but how old were you when you learned that numbers were Arabic and that almost every culture in the world knew, about the precessions of the stars and that the Earth was not the center of the universe, while Europe was still burning people over stuff like that. And basically because we still had the remnants of that kind of othering, that everything good had to come from Europe and the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. Meanwhile, the Maya and the Aztecs and the Chinese and the Persians and pretty much everyone else, had already mapped out, the path of Uranus. They knew when Halley's Comet was coming. They had calendars going for thousands of years accurately. So why not people in Madagascar do that to they take over and they diminish the accomplishments of those that came before them, who probably didn't disappear overnight. It's probably some sort of combination of everywhere else, assimilation, killing, disease, whatever.
Yeah, it's honestly, like with anything else historically, there's a lot of variation that goes into it, and it's really hard to determine what causes what is the result of what, and perhaps most importantly, like, was the othering of the Fazimba something that occurred before Christianization or afterwards? It's really hard to tell because I didn't mention this. That document that I mentioned earlier, the Tantara, which is one of the best recorded versions of the Fazimba legend, was itself written by a Christian missionary. So the idea that, that the version of the Fazimba that we are getting is an untainted, original Malagasy legend, free of outside influence, is just not true.
Right.
And so the idea that, they could have been sort of othered and viewed as sort of painted negatively by Christian missionaries who wanted to challenge their importance within Malagasy traditional religion, it makes sense. It aligns best, and it also aligns well with later confirmed Malagasy history, which shows ideological and social tensions between Christians and non-Christians on the island. Regardless, I do have to leave soon, but do you have anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Just one quick question. Is there any evidence to support the people from, I think you said Austro-Indonesian, that they were short of stature compared to their contemporaries on Madagascar at the time?
So, I should clarify, the mainline theory is that the people in Austronesia were likely the first people to land on Madagascar, so their contemporaries in Madagascar would have most likely been non-existent.
Okay, well, the migrants then from the mainland, is there like a noticeable average height difference that would cause this, they're half men, or that was just part of the othering of them later on?
Not to my knowledge. I think that generally East Africans are a little bit taller than Indonesians today, but we don't know that was necessarily true back then. And also the legends originate from the more Indonesian descended cultures themselves. So
right, and it's not like one group was 6 feet tall and the others were 3'6". It's all right. There you go. All right, so no aliens, no monsters. We can't rule those things out, but it seems unlikely. But it's still something that's a mystery that has not yet been solved, and maybe one day it will.
Possible.
It is possible.
I am thoroughly surprised that Ancient Aliens has not found out about Fazimba yet.
All right, well,
because
I finally beat them.
About this, I was like, God, if the History Channel ever gets their hands on this, they're gonna have like 3 specials about it.
I finally beat them to something. There you go. I've arrived. Thank you, Andy.
Take that, History Channel.
That's right. I'm going to find that guy that says, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. I mean, he's my hero, of course. All right. Well, tell the folks where they can find. Well, first, I should thank you for giving us an education on the Moors, and that actually it's a complete misnomer of a term, but just for the lack of brevity, or for the sake of brevity, to say education about the Moors and some of the history and the timeline, and then going into the fascinating story of the Fazimba and the many things that they might be. A little disappointed that they're not actually monsters that came out of a volcano or demigods or whatever, but such is life, and that's not really your lane anyway. So where can folks find you? How can they support you? Do you have any projects other than the history of Africa? Not that that's not enough.
Nope, that's all I'm doing right now. You can find the History of Africa podcast or on Twitter at Hist of Africa. So HIST of Africa. And check me out. I do a lot of stuff. If you like African history, you will like the show, because that's all that the show's about. It's all about African history. So if you want some of that, you know where to find it.
There you go. Excellent show. I listen to it every week, except when he's between seasons, and then, of course, there's nothing to listen to there.
Yes.
So unless you're a Patreon, and then he has supplemental episodes as well. So there you go. So check that out. And if you have a few extra bucks, become a Patreon and you'll get that extra content. But I think he's actually the only History of Africa podcast, or at least he was when he started. There may be others that followed since, but he's been doing that, 4 years?
Yeah, I was the only one when I started. I think that there's another one called It's a Continent, which is fine. Like, the show's good. They don't really focus on pre-colonial African history, though, which is what I focus on, so there's a bit of a difference. If you want to know more about, Kenya's struggle for independence, or the impact of oil economies on modern Africa. That's probably your thing more than my show. But if you want to know more about Africa before colonialism, then that is more of my speed.
Well, nobody has to choose. It's
and there also were there's like one weird show that came out like a few years before I did, where the guy like said that it was about African history, but if you check what it's been about for like the last 40 years, it's all about like American politics.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go. So if you want an authentic history of Africa, going back in some cases thousands of years, Andy's your guy. That's your show. And of course, as any longtime listener of this show knows, I've had on folks from Legendary Tales of Africa and Around the Fire. So, you know, some of the...
oh, yes. They're great.
Yeah.
They're great. I love those guys. They're awesome.
Yeah, I've had them both on. Actually,
stay legendary, as they always say.
Right, the folks from Legendary were on twice because they also do the Asian tapestry. So they did Goosebumps in part of my Halloween month spooky stuff. One from African spooky stuff, and one from Asian spooky stuff. The Asian tapestry and Legendary Africa, and then Around the Fire was probably about a year ago. But yeah, so you can check those stuff also. So anyway, I thank you once again. Thank you all for tuning in, and check us out next week. We'll have another episode of Garden of Doom.
Bye.
किस्मत का तारा चमका है जो रुक जावे वो ही तरसे ये नगरी कंगना झुमका है ओ भैया चुन ले डगरिया गिरता ता थैया थैया रे लहरों को काटेगी तेरी नैया रे तेरा माथा चमके सजेगा राजा बन के तेरा माथा चमके सजेगा राजा बन के चांदी और सोना तोले दुनिया मारी हथेली मडोले ए मोरा मन बोले दुनिया मारी हथेली मडोले तेरे चर्चे तेरा ही नाम होवेगा जो कुछ पावे झोली भर ले तेरा ही